Hello, I'm Cosmo and welcome to my PC Gaming Fails of 2015, a list that I've compiled of the top mistakes, problems and errors made in PC gaming of last year. To qualify for this list, something has to involve gaming and be on PC. Duh. It also needs to have had a problem with its pre-release, its actual release, an update, or just a general gameplay issue. Scoring is based on how many issues arise during this problem, and the list is ranked from lowest to highest. So buckle your seatbelts, as things are definitely gonna get a little bumpy. Embo, the badass elephant, a game due to be played by me, but I'll part as part of cosmoplaysgames soon, keep an eye out, had a bit of a false start this year when it came out in July on PC. Upon release, players found that they couldn't actually run the game, as the executable was claiming to be missing. It turns out that what was actually released was a pre-release build and not the actual final game. Apologies were made, and the game was removed from Steam for it to return the next day with the correct version. Sorry guys, but despite all that, you still get one fail. Cast your mind back to April, and you may remember when Valve tried to help the Skyrim modding community by allowing mods to be paid for. The idea was to give modders a chance at earning money for their content in a similar way to how hats work in Team Fortress 2. Unfortunately, things didn't quite work out right, and there was no quality control that guaranteed the mod would actually work, that it didn't contain any malicious code, or that the person selling the mod was actually the author of the mod. After constant criticism, Valve removed the entire option and refunded all monies. It was a shame really, as the idea was good, but the execution just wasn't. The fails list will not be complete without Ubisoft being on it at least once. After the scary missing face of Unity last year, Ubisoft have only managed a minor fail this year. The collector's edition of Heroes of Might and Magic was advertised as containing bonus in-game content with an exclusive hero and a new scenario map, a physical copy of the game, 2 lithographs, a tarot game, a figurine, a digital soundtrack and a 96-page art book. Now this was all true unless you were in North America, as they got the fantastic in-game content, tarot game, lithographs, figurine, digital soundtrack, 96-page art book and a download code from Uplay? Customers complained, claiming that they had been misled, and Ubisoft apologised profusely. But at first, they refused to refund anyone affected, as they had actually supplied the game, but not in the actual physical sense. Eventually though, they did relent and gave refunds or compensation for those that wanted it. So it's still a fail, but at least it's still nowhere near the scary face of Unity. When Payday 2 came out, a promise was made that it would not contain microtransactions, similar to how its predecessor worked by paying for DLC. However, 2 years later, and the developer announces that microtransactions are to be implemented in the form of drills that will give you special equipment for the game. Now, if you're scratching your head, so are the community, and as you can imagine, they were quite upset at this and demanded answers. Eventually it was explained, and Ask Me Anything, that it was a necessary evil, as the game had grown so much that to continue to support it with the team that they had, more revenue was needed, and this was determined to be the best way. It just goes to show you that if you're going to make a game, never make promises about it, especially if it's always in development, because you never know what you might need to do. Star Wars Battlefront made a triumphant return this year and had a rather successful beta phase in which you could take part in the Battle of Hoth. However, some people noticed that the Imperials tended to win more than when the Rebels did. It turns out that there was actually a balance issue in the beta, and that the Imperials were more likely to win. Nobody really cared though, as they were actually enjoying the beta too much, and technically speaking, it is historically accurate. I mean, if you don't believe me, go watch The Empire Strikes Back. Deus Ex Mankind Divided was announced this year at E3, with plenty of demos and high expectations. However, it was the pre-order system set up by Square Enix, or Enix, however you want to pronounce it, that caused the fail here. In a sort of Kickstarter way, if enough pre-orders came through, then certain rewards would be given at 5 different tiers, the final reward being that the game would be released 4 days earlier as a result of all the pre-orders. However, the entire system was criticised and eventually dropped, which is probably just as well, as it was announced the game had slipped by 6 months till August. Life is Strange, a game that proves that Telltale is not the only company that can make new age adventure games, made a few fails this year. starting with its release dates. Now, it's usual for episodic games to release their episodes as soon as they are ready, but maybe some thought should have been made when releasing episode 3 at the same time as a certain RPG with the number 3 in the title. Besides that, the game also fails in the choice trap. As proven by Bioshock Infinite that choice doesn't really exist in games and everything is all predetermined, the game had the same problem as its Telltale counterparts, in that it would display the Telltale lie at the beginning of each episode, stating that choices you made affected the story. Overall, the choices you made did affect things during the course of the game, but only things that were secondary to the main plot. Granted, the reverse time mechanic was useful, in that you were able to see the alternate choices if you so desired. But even then, the consequences were very minor to the story. Even the death of Kate, which, if you didn't save her and is not reversible, doesn't really do anything except alter some conversations and remove a non-essential scene. Plus, the game falls into the problem that most, if not all, fiction using time travel does. Being able to travel around time means that you wipe out previous decisions or timelines by changing the past. In terms of the game, you essentially wipe out things that you chose to do a certain way. Saving Alyssa from the football, hiding in a cupboard, and overwatering your plants are just a few of the things that are trampled on by this mechanic at least once. Finally, spoiler alert, the ending was the biggest fail. Those choices you made during the course of the game count for nothing when you're given a binary choice at the end. Save Chloe, your blue-haired friend, which the game is actually all about, or save the town and all the characters you met over the last 5 chapters. Save Chloe and the entire town is destroyed, and everyone killed, and Max and Chloe drive off into the sunset. Save the town and you go all the way back in time to the very beginning of the game, and instead of saving Chloe from being shot, you don't do a thing. The result ends up being that the conspiracy you uncovered during the course of the game was destined to be uncovered anyway, but at the cost of Chloe's life, meaning that the whole point of the game was basically to spend some time with Chloe and rekindle Max's relationship with her, which doesn't actually happen because you wipe it out. Let's just hope the sequel improves upon this and doesn't fall into the same trap. Mortal Kombat X, the sequel to the rebooted storyline created in Mortal Kombat 9, had a big launch issue on PC. Utilising a new system on Steam, the idea was that it would allow you to play the game as it downloaded, as the game was divided into chunks, or in certain ways DLC packs. This was even true to the disc version of the game, as all that was installed was a 3GB base game, and not the actual game content. At midnight the game unlocked successfully, and people could run it, but the actual content didn't download, and players basically all they got was a menu simulator that crashed as soon as you tried to do anything bar change options. Confusion proceeded, as the response some people got when contacting customer support was, "It's not out yet, what are you talking about?" as well as a flurry of bad reviews on Steam. Eventually the issue was fixed, but not until later on in the day when the damage had been done. But there was worse to come. Frame rate issues, graphical issues, and a control menu that crashed if you opened it using a joypad was added to by a laggy multiplayer. The issue? The game was ported by an outside company and not NetherRealm themselves, probably at Warner's request, but we'll get to that later. Eventually, after a few rather large 15GB patches, I kid you not, things settled down a little, but the damage was done and the fails still count. And now a few honourable mentions. StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void unfortunately came out at the same time as probably the most important game of the year, and unless you actually were a big fan of it, you might not even know it was actually out. Evolve, a game that had so many different add-ons and DLCs at launch that it was so confusing that you actually wonder what was actually in the base game in the first place. Fans of Mega Man and investors of the Kickstarter for Mighty No. 9 were also a little disappointed this year, as the game's release date slipped twice. Firstly to the later half of the year, and then completely to 2016. Add to that a completely rather disappointing and difficult demo release, and you can see why they're a little annoyed. Batman Arkham Knight should have been the jewel in Rocksteady's Arkham trilogy. Instead, it was more like its tombstone when it was released on PC. From launch, the game ran horribly for anyone running a PC with AMD components or those who had a high-end computer. Frame drops, stuttering, graphical glitches were just a handful of the issues reported by players, and the reviews section in Steam reeked of negativity. Thanks to the Steam refunds policy introduced earlier this year, refunds were aplenty. So much so, in fact, that Warner pulled the PC game completely from sale, apologised for the problems, and promised to dedicate all resources to fixing the issues. Apparently, though, that kind of meant going completely silent for 4 months, and then continuing to use other resources to develop the DLC for the other formats, rather than delay it while fixing the PC version. It later came out in an article that Warner knew about the issues pre-launch, and in most cases caused them. First, they told developer Rocksteady to focus completely on the console versions, rather than develop all 3. They then gave another rather inexperienced development team a rather short amount of time to port the game. So short was this time that they weren't able to fix all the bugs during testing. Testing was apparently only done on the 720p version of the game, and testing was limited due to Warner not wanting details of the plot leaked. Add to the fact that they executed what was encrypted to add its own DRM, which also caused issues with various people, and you have to ask the question, if Warner knew about all the problems, why did they go ahead with the release? The simple answer is, of course, money. Eventually, though, after 4 months of almost silence from Warner and a lot of very angry players, the game was finally patched and re-released with all the missing DLC that was already out on console. This patch didn't fix everything though. Apparently it still has a few memory issues, as it was stated that it needed at least 12 gigabytes of RAM in order for the game to cope. They also didn't fix any of the SLI or crossfire support that was promised, and after a few weeks it decided that they weren't going to do it anyway, as the difference was negligible. More patches came along, fixing little things here and there, but overall the game ran relatively well and had a high resolution textures. Not that anyone cared, because by that time everyone had either finished the game or given up and played it on console. Worse was yet to come. After the community continued to show complete dislike for the game, Warner stated that they would honour any refunds wanted regardless of the time period, but only if it was purchased on Steam. Outside of Steam, you were effectively stuck if the company you bought it from wouldn't refund you, like I would be if I wanted a refund. They then informed people what compensation to expect if you had persevered throughout this mess. 3 copies of all the Batman Arkham games. Great! Except any decent fan of the Arkham trilogy or series would already have these games, like I do. And if so, do you know what you got? Nothing, because you didn't get any extra copies. Warner were not interested in giving you extra copies which you could, in theory, sell. There was also some talk about a week's exclusivity on PC for some of the DLC. But to be honest, since most of the DLC is in challenge maps or extra little challenges to do with the Batmobile, or there's some short story based DLC, that doesn't really count for very much. The reality is the entire scenario is a joke, and quite frankly, in my 20 years experience of being a PC gamer, I've never seen such a bad handling of a AAA game in terms of its release, which is why Batman Arkham Knight is at the top of this year's list, and, based on my experience of PC gaming, is now what I will consider the worst fail of PC gaming of all time. Yes, there are worse games, yes, there are worse releases, but not one sticks in my mind as being botched, rebotched, and then totally disregarded like this. The real shame is that the game isn't actually that bad. It's actually quite good. It's a good send-off to the characters created in these games. It's a good ending to the Batman or story arc. Okay, yes, the ending is predictable. Scarecrow isn't really that scary. The Batmobile is overused. The enemy types are just the same ones blended all together. And the DLC is extremely lackluster. But it didn't deserve this treatment. No game does. So Warner, you have the honour of being the worst PC gaming fail of all time. Congratulations. And that is it, guys, for the top PC gaming fails of 2015. Tune in next year for the top PC gaming fails of 2016. But in the meantime, let me know what you think of my list. Do you agree with it? Let me know in the comments section or with a like or dislike. Subscribe to my channel for my thoughts, reviews and raw PC game playthroughs. And maybe at some point even some coding, if I get round to it. Thanks for watching, guys.